Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're here with Donna Levin, author of her recently published novel, The Talking Stick. Donna Levin is the author of Extraordinary Means, California Street, There's More Than One Way Home, and He Could Be Another Bill Gates. In April 2024, Skyhorse published her latest novel, The Talking Stick. In addition to novels, Donna has published 2 books about writing, Get That Novel Started and Get That Novel Written. Donna has taught fiction writing for 3 decades, most notably at the University of California Extension at Berkeley, where she led the novel writing workshop. She has also been a frequent guest at writers' conferences, including the San Francisco Writers' Conference and the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and she teaches for writers.com. Donna's work is included in Boston University's 20th Century Archives and in the California State Library's collection of California novels. She lives in San Francisco, more at donnalevin.com. And Kirkus Reviews called The Talking Stick a funny and occasionally touching novel about rebuilding your life after a crisis. The phrase occasionally touching made me laugh really hard when I read that. Donna, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to hear you read for us. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Sean. I have to say that with Kirkus, I wish they'd left off the modifier occasionally. Could they have just said funny and touching? But I didn't want to put the ellipse in there. So thank you all for being here. And I recognize some familiar faces and names, and I appreciate everybody. Let me tell you, for those of you who don't want to spend $33 on a book, there are now, I see, used copies available on Amazon already. Where all those copies came from, I don't know, that they're already being sold secondhand, but I don't care. Buy them. And then also, just so I don't forget, if you are on Goodreads and you want to put this on your TBR list, I appreciate it. That doesn't even mean you have to read it. It's just on your TBR list, and that makes me look a little better. Okay, so The Talking Stick. This opens when our heroine, Hunter Fitzgerald, on the same day loses her job and her husband leaves her for a friend. And then she discovers, well, she's kind of trying to get over that. She discovers that he's run up a $40,000 credit bill on their credit card. So now she's just desperate for a job. But when she calls, I should mention, she was a manager at a gym that closed. When she starts calling all her professional contacts, she finds that they've kind of mysteriously disappeared and they're not responding to her. And she doesn't know why. She will find out why. But meanwhile, she has her electric bill to pay. So she gets a job at Starbucks, and I'll start there. Yes. Okay. Hunter got off to a good start at Starbucks. Preston, the manager, said she was the most capable employee he'd ever trained. She was working the register on the afternoon of the first day and sequencing drinks at the end of the second. The afternoon that she handed over a venti mocha with raspberry syrup, no whip, no foam, and skim milk, Preston tapped her on the shoulder and said she had a future there. Just don't think about taking my job, LOL. He spelled out LOL. She smiled while she patted the steam off her face. She appreciated the praise, but the novelty of the job wore off quickly. The strap of her apron around her head reminded her of a noose. Teenagers came in, ordered on the app, then picked up their drinks without pausing their own conversations. Sometimes they came back to complain of the wrong type of milk. Even Hunter thought oat milk was a misnomer. She'd heard a comic point out that oats had no tits. Welcome to the working class. 8 hours with 2 10-minute breaks and 30 minutes for lunch. Were millions of people really doing this every day? Hunter was 15 years older than the next oldest barista, Caitlin with a C. There was also Caitlin with a K, so they were known as the C Caitlin and the K Caitlin. The younger baristas were welcoming and supportive, but kept their distance. Maybe they sensed that Hunter carried bad relationship juju. Take pride in your work, no matter what it is. And she did. She refined her technique, milk, shots, syrup, finish. Her memory was good and her hands were fast. Then Preston asked her to mop. I'm sorry. Then Did it have to be when she was mopping, dizzy from the smell of the generic cleaning fluid, and with the knot in her apron, she'd never wear emerald green again, coming undone, that Cindy walked in? Cindy would be out of work too, as well, since Energy for All closed. She was a popular personal trainer and a beauty in the mold of Hunter herself, tall, thin, blonde. She was at least 10 years younger, though, probably more. Hunter pushed her hair off her face using the inside of her arm because her hands were wet. Put up a good front, she told herself. Plenty of women have been divorced. You might trade up. How's your job search going? She asked Cindy after they exchanged awkward greetings. Much as she didn't want to see Cindy for other reasons, she might get some insight into her own troubles from her. Hunter's latest theory was that the Federal Trade Commission was investigating predatory practices by fitness centers, like those join for $5 a month offers that morphed into $300 a month when you weren't paying attention. Oh, Cindy shrugged one shoulder. I'm going to go out on my own, go into people's homes, you know. That way I don't have to split the money with corporate. I sure wish Energy for All had given us some warning. Tell me about it. But Cindy's expression was distinctly puzzled. Hunter positioned her hands on the mop handle as if it were a base. She was uncomfortably aware of that 10-10-30 rule, and underneath Preston's friendly manner, he too was younger by at least 10 years. Hunter heard the clicking of a stopwatch. Something was amiss. She tightened her grip on the mop handle. Well, I'd better get my order in, Cindy said. I have a lot of special requests. Don't we all, Hunter thought. But she wasn't going to let the moment pass. Have you talked to anyone else from Energy? Now Cindy looked nervous. She cast glances up at the menu board behind Hunter. I wish they didn't use pork in so many of their sandwiches. Cindy? Oh, listen, I love this song. Frank Sinatra's One for the Road was coming from the speaker. I've got to Shazam it. Cindy had her cell phone in hand and was heading toward the speaker, but Hunter called after her. What's up? Well, a couple of my friends have read Jesus Warned Me He Was a Jerk, Cindy blurted. And that was the tell-all memoir that her friend wrote. You've read it. I haven't yet, no. I guess maybe you should. Cindy took a step sideways. I want you to know I really enjoyed working with you. Then, do you get a discount here? That would be a perk. Get it? Perk? I get one free item a day. Hunter looked back to see if Preston or one of the others was looking at her. What's in Jesus Warned Me that I should know? Cindy's pale blue eyes quivered. When she still didn't respond, Hunter prompted her. Tell me? I haven't finished it yet, Cindy said, but Landon gave me a copy and said to read the first 4 chapters. Angelica St. Ambrose says things about you that I'm sure aren't true. Damn, that line is getting long, Cindy said. Gotta run. So I'm going to skip ahead. I warned Sean it would take me just hopefully not too long here to queue up the second reading. Search. There we go. Now, this book, in desperation to pay her electric bill, Hunter's going to take her stack of William Shatner Christmas albums to flea market, hoping to sell them to get enough money to get by, because the Starbucks income isn't quite cutting it. And a mysterious woman gives her a Navajo talking stick to use in a potential support group for people in similar circumstances. And you'd have to read to find out exactly how that goes. But eventually she will hook up with 3 other women who will become her friends. And this is the beginning of chapter 5, where we meet one of those women for the first time, Penelope. Penelope Winthrop was very afraid of death, and Scott would remarry within a month, the lousy bastard. But all she knew at that moment was that she couldn't go on like this. The pain in her chest was unbearable. When she tried to inhale, the stinging in her lungs would have made her cry out if only she could draw enough breath. The room was nearly dark. The only light was from the monitors surrounding her. They produced a faint, insectile buzzing. You're just fine, Mrs. Winthrop. The doctor's voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Hand on her shoulder, white coat through her slitted eyes, then the sound of footsteps receding. A few hours before, the pain had awakened her. It felt as though her heart was being squeezed by a fist. She'd managed to get out of bed and stagger into Scott's room. There she collapsed across his legs. Take me to the hospital, she rasped. It was their second visit that week, their fourth in the past month. They'd put something into the IV that made her drowsy. If it hadn't been for the pain, she would have slept. As it was, she was in an underwater gloaming where she couldn't speak or think clearly. Wake up, Penelope dear, Scott said, patting her hair. She smiled at his touch, though her eyes had closed. She imagined the nurses smiling too, watching such a tender moment between this long married couple. Then Scott's breath was hot in her ear. There's no friggin' heart attack, he said. Penelope turned her head to the nurse, who was fiddling with the IV tube. Can I have my handbag? She asked hoarsely. No, no, what do you need? I'll get it for you. But Penelope could hardly tell her what she needed. A Valium. It was in this drugged but terrified state that Penelope remembered how it started 15 years before. It wasn't as if she'd never, well, let's see. What happened, guys?
I have no idea what happened.
Okay, all right, better, okay. It wasn't as if she'd never heard of Valium. The first time she heard about it in regard to herself, though, was the day that Scott took her to Dr. Schmulowitz in Green Bay, or was it Kenfield? That Scott was there made her realize how serious it was. Scott was never in Marin County during daylight hours, or very often in the evening either. He rose at 5:30 a.m., went jogging, and headed to the city by 6:30, the only way to beat the goddamn traffic. She might see him before she went to sleep. She might not. On weekends, he followed an identical morning schedule, though he did spend the afternoons in Marin at the club, where he golfed but did not drink. Dr. Schmulowitz was bald all the way back to his collar, where an inch of pure white hair surrounded the bottom of his scalp like an ermine stole. He had no discernible neck. His white coat reached nearly to his dangling earlobes. I'm concerned about her, Fred. Scott put his fingertips on the edge of the desk. Scott had beautiful hands with long fingers and perfectly groomed nails. He never spoke of manicures, so Penelope imagined that he had a secret place he went to, where he paid only cash and used a fake name, a nom de manicure. It's been a very tough couple of months, Scott continued. She was sure she had cancer. He described the series of tests, the x-rays, the MRI, the ultrasound, the scopes through every orifice. And would you believe it, doctor, but the blood tests were the hardest of all, since Penelope usually fainted when stabbed with a needle, sometimes just at the sight of the needle? But no, he took it back. Just don't get him started on the MRI. Penelope was claustrophobic. Penelope hugged on the hem of her skirt. She was in no way reassured that she didn't have cancer, especially not ovarian or pancreatic. There was a reason they called them the silent killers. I just want her to stop worrying so much. Penelope looked up, startled. Scott's voice had shifted abruptly from frustration to concern. He turned sharply so that his back was to them, but she could see that he had covered his eyes with his hands for several moments. Can't you help her? His voice cracked. She had never heard his voice break, let alone seen signs of tears, not when his mother died, not when he missed that hole-in-one by 3 inches. She thought she might cry herself. She'd been so unfair to him, suspecting him of affairs. You betcha. Dr. Schmulowitz had an old man's ragged voice. All these fancy schmancy new medications, he said dismissively. Prozac, Schmozac, Lexapro, Schmexapro, Buspirone, Schmusperone. I'll tell you what's worked for my patients for years, Valium. He leaned over the desk where there were several stacks of papers cantilevering over each other. But stay away from the generic schmeric. I have to write a special prescription to satisfy those damn insurance companies. He scribbled on a prescription pad as he spoke. Then he handed it to Scott. Nancy, he shouted. The nurse receptionist came in. She was a young woman with a large cross tattooed on her chest where a three-dimensional one might have rested. It's actually Brittany, she said to Penelope and Scott. She added with a mix of rue and amusement. He likes to call me Nancy. That was my predecessor's name. I remember Nancy, Scott said. She was a nice girl, Dr. Schmulowitz sighed, but she retired. When they left Dr. Schmulowitz's office, Scott drove straight to the pharmacy. Penelope protested. I'm perfectly capable of filling my own prescription. But she rubbed his thigh to demonstrate her appreciation. Let me do this for you. Didn't he have to go back to the office? This was more important, he said. He hadn't felt so cared for in a long time. He pulled into the mall. It was a giant mall, close to their freeway exit. All the malls of Marin were close to Highway 101. Once upon a time, people settled near lakes and rivers. Now they occupied the land next to the freeway. You stay here, Scott said. It seemed a long wait. The car was hot, and Scott had left the child lock on, a bad habit of his since they had no children. He thought he did this with her safety in mind, so she couldn't be irritated. She might have a hot flash if she had to wait much longer, and without her reading glasses, she couldn't be sure which button to press. Here, Scott held out his palm. There was a light turquoise pill there, very small. All she knew it could be cyanide, but she swallowed it before he even handed her the bottled water he'd brought. Then she chugged the water down anyway. What took you so long? He looked hurt. I pushed my way to the head of the line. It's only been 10 minutes. He smiled sheepishly. Or so. I wanted to grab you some ginger ale because I know it's your favorite, but there wasn't any that was cold. It was only after they passed the marina that she began to feel it. The sensation of something lifting inside her, the way bread rises, or even Penelope was terrified of flying, but this was like the moment that the landing gear parts the runway and you know that you're going to reach the sky after all. When she thought ahead to the rest of the afternoon and the evening that lay before her, it wasn't with the usual dread. Rather, all the quotidian tasks, watering the plants, removing her makeup, bathing, brushing her teeth, usually oppressed her. She seemed so easy, so doable, so pleasant. And then a blessed peace settled over her, a peace she hadn't known since she was a child in church, knowing they'd go to her grandmother's house for Sunday dinner afterward and have roast beef. She wasn't high. She was just okay. When they pulled up to their front door, Scott kept the engine idling. Are you all right to make it inside? I can see that the pill has had, let's just say, the desired effect. You aren't, she stopped before finishing. Coming in? I have to get back to the office. But she stopped again. It had to be 4:30 by now. I'll call to check on my little wifey. When she got out of the car, she swayed on her heels. You're not going to fall on me, are you? Scott laughed. She wasn't completely confident that she wouldn't, but she didn't want to trouble him further. Then she almost did fall, but she grabbed the loop of the lion's head door knocker in time. She was searching for her house keys when she heard the car go into reverse. Scott called through the half-open window. I knew Dr. Schmolose wouldn't let us down. So that was where I was trying to start. How long did I go for? Well, about right. That was about 20 minutes. So
Donna, thank you so much. I love all the humor in your writing. I loved the man with the long earlobes, and I loved the dialogue with the psychiatrist. But of course, I was most moved by your description of working in a Starbucks, which I did for 2 years in high school, and can confirm it is 100% as boring as you made it seem. The Caitlin with the C and K really, really got me. Thank you so much. Um, uh, we'll move into a Q&A. So if anybody has any questions or comments or just wants to talk to Donna about her book or her writing, you can either use the raise your hand function or put your message in the chat and I'll read it for you.
it can be about writing. It doesn't have to be about the book.
Rachel asks, what does your daily writing schedule look like?
Well, it kind of, at this point in time, it kind of depends. For many years, I had a good schedule. I got up, I went swimming, I came back, I made coffee. Coffee was a key part of this. And then I would write for 3 hours. And people used to say, well, what do you do the rest of the day? But believe me, that writing for 3 hours managed to take up all the day. It's a little bit more catch as catch can now. The key thing for me is to make sure is to have a deadline. So I'm in a writing group that meets bi-weekly, and I want to have pages to share for that group. This is, many years later than from what I just described. So that will get me working at all hours the last few days before we meet. And that works for me. I think that creating some kind of writing practice is really crucial. For me, being at a writing group has been really helpful, but there are times when you want to work without getting feedback. And I don't think you have to write a long time. I think you just have to write daily and make it a priority. I tell myself, because this may have been longer than you need to hear, but there's always this loop in my head of what do I have to do next? It's change the laundry, load the dishwasher, put on, in this case, put on mascara, but um, whatever it is. And I have to remind myself that everything takes care of itself except the writing. That's the one thing I have to say, okay, either this is a priority or it isn't. This other stuff will take care of itself. So,
Deng-Chi asks, how did the idea of the book come to you?
well, thank you. That was a nice question to ask. Thank you. Um, some years ago, another writer friend of mine, Mark Coggins, who's an old friend and he writes hard-boiled detective stories, and they're terrific. I've read them all. He and I were having coffee one day, and we both said we'd like to write a book about something magical, some magical object. And his idea was that the main character finds a device in his garage that will cause the other person present to fall in love with him. And my idea was, I didn't pin down the object, was some object that would force people to tell the truth. And then we went back to writing our, respective novels, etc. Then it was at that time, I think I had already joined this writing group that I'm in now with these really horrific women. And gossip is an ugly word, but I would often talk about them to my daughter, who at one point said, you should write a book about a group like that. And I combined the two things. That's where the idea of the talking stick that has this possibly magical, possibly power of suggestion effect on person who holds it to recall things that happen that memories that they've revised. They're not repressed memories, but they remember something happened a certain way, but it really happened a different way. So I thought I saw something else in the chat, but maybe not.
No, there's a couple other questions.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, Mingjia has two questions. The first question is, how did you get into writing novels?
I think it was something I always wanted to do from childhood. Reading, I was a big reader, and I've always loved the novel as a form, say more than the short story, more than poetry. There's great short stories, there's great poetry, but the novel was what I always really loved. And some writers made it look so easy. Just a few minutes before we started, for something made me remember the Joan Didion novel, Play It As It Lays, from the late 70s. Good novel, but it looks very easy. It's just these little vignettes about this woman having a breakdown. And then, of course, there's Gatsby was a big inspiration for me in high school when the teacher peeled back the layers of the meanings of the names. But I majored in theater in college. I went to law school. And then at some point I said, if you're going to do it, you better do it. And then I finally started doing it.
I didn't know that you had a background in both theater and law. Of course, you know what they say about lawyers. They're writers who get paid.
And what they say about novelists is that they're writers who don't get paid.
Yeah. That's right. And don't talk about poets.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Mingjia's second question is, would you recommend traditional or self-publishing?
Well, there's kind of a middle ground between traditional and self-publishing. The thing with self-publishing is, even now, with all the avenues available, unless you're writing really niche genres, romance, paranormal fantasy, and you can turn out a lot of product pretty fast, which I can't, but some people can, and you're willing to spend a lot of time in marketing. It's usually not a good way to go. I come across very successful self-published authors, but again, they're writing a book a month and they're advertising like crazy. And If you are happy with just friends and family reading your work, right? I have a friend who just self-published her book, and she's very happy. She really wrote it so her extended family could read this book based on her great-grandmother's life. The thing is that between self-publishing and traditional publishing, there's the big five, and that's hard to break into. You need an agent to break into the big five, and it's hard to get an agent. And then when you get an agent, and the agent can love your book, and then they have to find somebody who also, at a publishing house. But there are small presses springing up like crazy. I was going to say like mushrooms. It seemed like a cliche. I backtracked. I just said like crazy. But small presses, and that it's not a good way to get rich. They probably won't pay you in advance, just royalties. But, but I mean, it's one of the really good things that's happened to writing and publishing in the last, 15 years or so, maybe longer. There's print on demand technology now. As I actually recall, that's, kind of emerged in the 90s. So now a publisher doesn't have to print 10,000 copies in order to break even. They can just print one at a time. And that's just opened the field for so many more people. So the self-publishing has that limit. The traditional publishing has really expanded. If I would, of course, everybody wants to be in the big five. I would encourage everybody to try that. There's also hybrid publishing, and you've got to be very careful about that, because I think there's some good hybrid publishers, like She Writes has been pretty successful for some writers. But I've heard some bad things about other hybrids. Well, they'll charge you a lot of money to publish and supposedly promote your book, but I don't know. I would do a lot of research before going with a hybrid publisher.
Philip has two questions. First question, did you map out your characters before you introduced them in the story?
I did a lot of what would I call it? Homework on all the characters. And unfortunately, just the way it is for me, this whole book took a lot of trial and error. I worked on it for a year and a half, showed it to consulting editor who I respect a lot, in New York, and paid him. And he said, the stakes just aren't high enough. And I threw out everything I had, started again with the same characters. But I did a lot of writing about biographies, backstory for characters, monologues for characters, all the traditional things. Now, the trick there is that after you've written all this great backstory for the characters, remember, the reader doesn't need to know it. Only you need to know it. Unless it really comes up, unless it's really necessary to the story, just leave it out. But yeah, so it was, I'm sure the writers who write more efficiently than I wish I didn't write so inefficiently, but that's just what it is for me. And a lot of rewriting.
Philip's second question, what genre would you classify this story as?
The easy one is just women's fiction. And Amazon has it listed as women's friendship fiction. And then they have it listed as humorous fiction, which I was very flattered about. And I don't want anybody to think it's a joke book, but I do take some pride in it being funny. And even when I was proofreading The Galleys, I was laughing at some of my own jokes. I'm my own best audience for the humor, not for everything else. But wait a minute. What? Oh, genre. Sorry. What was the question? I'm like Joe Biden here. I've never really been sure whether to call it. I guess you could call it magical realism. That I'm afraid of that scaring people off. but, women's fiction is the very short answer. I'm not good at short answers always. Let's see.
Mingjie asks, does the average novelist manage to sustain himself or herself with their earnings? I read an article about the Penguin versus DOJ monopoly trial and am under the impression that the Big Five milked the same 1 to 2 authors for decades, parentheses, James Patterson, and that only 1 in 1,000 authors achieved that kind of success.
You know, that's true of everything in the arts. If you, this is not something to take on with the idea of getting rich and famous. I actually, back when I was teaching at UC Extension, back to a lawyer in San Francisco, I think it was Richard North Patterson. I always mix up the Pattersons, James Patterson and Richard North, kind of interchangeable in my mind. Anyway, I think it was Richard North Patterson published a thriller, and it made this huge splash. And a few weeks later, my class started, and it was all lawyers who all thought, I mean, Patterson was a lawyer, all thought, oh, well, if Patterson can do it, I can do it too. And, I maybe some of them went on to great success. It's been a while. But this is no kind of shortcut to that kind of success. It's of course only 1 in 1,000 do that. I mean, the nice thing about the modern age is that there's room for a lot of us. If you want to go into the theater or want to be a poet or want to paint, it better not be to be rich and famous. That's really nice work if you can get it, but it's I said, it's kind of like going into acting and saying I'm going to be Meryl Streep or nothing. So
Um,
yeah, I
Philip,
was just going to say you've got to enjoy the process at some point. That's all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Philip asks, what else do you have in the hopper? Are you working on anything else?
Um, well, I am. In fact, I've started a novel that, okay, and this is my cynical side. This is going to be a murder mystery because I like to say that if you put the words "A Mystery by James Joyce" on the cover of Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, people would read it. And so I want to write a murder mystery, but the murder mystery will be kind of a vehicle for exploring the phenomenon of dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Used to be called multiple personality disorder. I've done some research into that, and it is absolutely fascinating. And it's, most of us know it from the worst is the movie Split, which the DID community hates. And I don't know if anybody saw, the United States of Terror about 10 years ago. Anyway, it's just there's a lot of YouTubers talking about their experience with it. And there's a lot of books, there are a lot of memoirs on it. There are medical journals, which I've also read, that describe the phenomenon. And it's just, I'm fascinated by it. And I've started it now. Hammering out the beats of the story is always the hardest part for me. But there will be murders,
Good.
maybe several.
I'm curious to know if, you described your process of your novel, you had all this like character work, and you described it as being sort of messy. I'm curious if all your novels follow a similar pattern or if there's anything unique about writing this one that was different.
Um, looking back, it seems like the earlier ones were easier. Um, the last few have been a lot of false starts. Um, I remember, there's more than one way home. I think I started that 4 times, and I always tell people, and I stand by this, don't go back to rewrite. But I several times with with all three, the last novels, started, got fairly deeply into it, and then just had to start again, which is always, risky because you want to, I believe in just, gunning through to that first draft, because a lot of the challenges of a novel are in the middle and the end. You can't really learn about writing a novel just by writing the beginning. So yeah, this was really hard. But the fantasy that the next one will be easier is what that keeps me going. We'll see.
Dungchi asks, which book are you reading now?
Which book I'm reading?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just started Matt Hay. I don't know whether how you pronounce his name. H-I-G. I'm sorry, Haig. How to Stop Time. Just started reading that. I had read The Midnight Library a while back. These days, I tend to try to read a variety of authors. Stephen King said that the advice he gives to people who want to write is write a lot and read a lot. And it's good advice. And to be honest, in the age of YouTube, I had been reading less for a while, but about 2 years ago, I really recommitted to the process of reading Freudian Slip. Part of the problem is a good reason, which is that I love reading. So whenever I'm reading, it feels like I'm just having fun. So there's that loop playing again. There's always something else I should be doing. I should be cleaning up. I should be sending emails. So I had to do a real shift my mindset to know that reading is also doing something productive. And I recently finished James, which I liked, and The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, which I loved, and The Heart's Invisible Furies, which I also loved. So wide range of genres and authors. I certainly am more interested in the more literary work than on the more commercial.
Philip asks, and this is in reference to your earlier books being easier to write, would that be because you were carrying around the early novels long before you began writing them?
I don't think so. I think to be honest, I think I had a couple lucky breaks with the first couple. Now, by the way, I also wrote a lot before I ever published anything. I wrote stuff that was too bad to even show anybody. And then I wrote stuff that I did send out and got an agent for, and she didn't sell it, but I don't falter for that. And I really hate to think that it's because I was younger and had more energy. I didn't have any kids. That probably helped. Now I've got 4, but they're grown. And you could spell, there's a pun there with Groan, the kids. So that may be part of it. I don't know. Oh, you know what I should have said? This is what I should have said. Now I take it more seriously, and I'm more ambitious in what I want to accomplish. That's why they're harder. Okay, so maybe we can edit the tape out, and that's my real answer.
Yeah, we'll edit that out. They're more complex, they take more time. Yeah.
They're more serious. They're much more serious. The early ones were more superficial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Philip also asks, when you read someone else, do you take notes of the styles they use?
Yeah. Yeah. I read on Kindle, and I highlight a lot. I love Kindle. As a writer, you want to see people buying and reading books. As a reader, though, I just love my Kindle because the dictionary feature, the search feature. So yes, I will. There's also a feature where you tap, and then you tap the little pen icon and you take notes. So definitely. Now, unfortunately, it's for a very, very long time now. As I said, as growing up, I loved to read and I read a lot. Once I really started writing seriously, um, I read can't read innocently anymore. I can't just read for the purest pleasure. I'm always reading a little bit as a critic, a little bit of what would I've done differently, a little bit of wow, this is good, or wow, this isn't good, or wow, this sucks, whatever, how did this, but so I mean that's the sad change. But yeah.
We still have 15 minutes, so if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Meanwhile, Donna, I know that you have a lot of advice to give to both first-time and, continuing novelists. So what do you think every novelist needs to know about being a professional novelist?
Well, I'll sum up what I think I've pretty much said as far as you definitely need a writing practice. I mean, people early years used over the years, people said, "Do you write when you get inspired?" And my answer is, I never get inspired. I just show up. So that's really important there. And the other is that you have to, the race is to the persistent, to keep going. And finally, for now at least, when you've done the very best you can do, and you really know you're finished, you only have 2 drafts left to do. But I have read over the years a lot of student manuscripts that I thought were very good and very promising, but needed another draft. And often the writer just didn't want to do that last draft. So, and believe me, I understand that.
That last draft, I mean, you're obviously talking about revision here. What do you think that people get wrong or don't know they need to know about revising a novel?
Well, the biggest thing, something I learned, and not everybody feels this way, but what I learned in the first writing group that, novel writing workshop that I was really serious about, well, it was my first novel writing workshop. The leader, our fearless leader, was very big on plot. And he was all about, keep the story moving and what happens next and what are these characters. And by the way, brainstorming plot, go back to what the characters want. What do these characters want? Um, so the problem is that revising plot is the hardest part because it's like a Rubik's Cube. Once you change one thing, everything else has to change to reflect that change. And on that, I'd say you just be brave. Just put your head down and make those changes because that's just really important. Then, of course, there is the language and and that's important too. And that comes with time and practice, but there's a lot of a lot of rereading you do and getting one more beta reader. I mean, a book can't be written by committee. I knew an agent actually who suggested, he wasn't my agent, but he suggested that you post chapters of your work in progress online and see what feedback you got. And I thought, that's, as I said, that's writing by committee. You can't do that. Or at least I don't, you end up with trying to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. But finding people who you can trust to read and give you feedback with a late draft, I think is really important. Also, though, I say this a lot in workshops, do share with care. People, when they find out you're writing, they might want to see some of it because they're curious. First of all, they're curious to see if they're in it. And those are not the people to show it to. Show it to somebody who doesn't have a stake in your personal life. You might be a friend, but somebody who has some experience critiquing fiction and can actually be of help. And even then, you take what they give you that feels right and forget the rest. But I definitely am a share with care kind of person. You know, usually family members are not the place to, or partners are not the place to start. You know.
Any final questions for Donna?
Yeah.
Before I forget, let me put the links to Donna's book in the chat. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Donna, thank you so much for this reading, for your delightful answers. I'm so happy that we did this.
Me too.
And we'll have we'll be emailing these links out. We'll have the recording of this meeting on YouTube probably tomorrow. Donna, thanks again. Everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good night.
And I
Bye.